Have you given any thought to contributing to the Melt? It's easy to do. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. It helps to keep the magic happening here at the Melt. So I encourage you to karmically entangle yourself with the Melt today by subscribing monthly for less than the price of a container of goatee wax, or a prosthetic pinky, or a half stick of DMT butter, or an inflatable casket, or the shrunken head of an Atlantean supermodel, or a woolly mammoth's merkin, or a crystalline replica of Baba Yaga's hut, or a capsule of Sasquatch dander.
This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
There's a vibe that can be attached to a place, particularly when experienced during one's childhood, that can be charged with magic in such a way as it casts a mood that can permeate your life. Many fairy tales and young adult books are filled with stories of such places, whether they exist merely within the mind of the subject, or whether they are actual places that one can access through a portal or a hard-to-find pathway or through a mirror. Experiences like these can open one up to the possibility that there is much more to this world than we can readily perceive with our senses. Today's guest, author and musician Mark Anthony Wyatt, has written a book about a place where he spent a lot of time as a child that he felt was imbued with such magic, where he returned throughout his life and continued to have and hear about experiences that defied explanation. I start off the conversation by asking Mark what his connection to Cornwall is.
I'm connected through my father's side of the family. And I first went down there when I was about 12, and I've been going back every year for sort of longer and longer time, except for recently for obvious reasons. I'm sort of stuck away, but so yeah, my father's aunties and so on. There's a whole tribe of them there, and they've got the Cornish names, Trevorrow and all these sort of names which are very common down there because they start with a TRE. Essentially, you could actually spot that in America as well. If you know anyone with those names, that is their ancestry, or some of it anyway. There's a lot of names starting with TRE or PEN, like Penmarrick and Pen Beagle, and anything with pen or tree. In fact, there's a rhyme. There's an old rhyme. I think it's by Trey Pole, Pon, Pol. Was it by Trey Pole and Pen? Ye shall know the Cornish men.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That goes back like 400 or 500 years. So yeah, they are like. They're not very well known outside of Britain, really. I've mentioned the Cornish, to people in America, and I understand it. It's a tiny, tiny part of our country, and people generally familiar. They know about the Irish and they know about the Scots and the Welsh, but they don't know the Cornish generally. Except there's about at least six communities in North America, and I've been to two of them, where they fly the Cornish flag. There's one in Wisconsin where we go quite a few. I've been up there a few times. Called Mineral Point. It's a lovely small town, and they fly the Cornish flag all over, and they've got lots of the history and the art and everything's up there. And then, of course, you've got Grass Valley in California. We popped in there a couple of years ago, and that was, and the buildings are all, because they're there because of the mines. Basically, the miners went out over several generations, over a period of 200 to 300 years, and they just basically settled there. And around Chicago, actually, there's a lot of Cornish in Chicago, but they don't tend to be quite as I don't say the wrong word, but they're not quite as loud about it as the Irish are. The Irish, they all love their culture, but the Cornish are a little bit quieter about it.
It's so interesting that you mentioned Grass Valley. I actually worked on a pot farm in Grass Valley. Yeah.
Oh, right.
So
do you remember seeing the Cornish flags?
I did, and I had no idea why.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the connection was. That's so cool.
Yeah.
There's also a town right near Grass Valley called Rough and Ready that was settled by prostitutes and miners.
Oh, right. Well, did you watch Deadwood?
I've watched a couple of episodes. Chris really loves Deadwood.
Yeah, I did. Well, I was disappointed with the ending. I wanted a happy ending, and the baddies won, didn't they? Really, but that's the story of modern America, isn't it? Really, but
I never saw the movie. I never saw the movie that supposedly capped it all off. Is that?
Yeah, I would like to see the movie, but last time I tried to watch it, I think I fell asleep before. Not because it was boring, but because I was tired. So I'll have to watch it again. But in Deadwood, they actually made reference, sort of like a slight reference in the series to the Cornish. And you could, in one of the bar scenes, it was very subtle, and I didn't spot it. Somebody told me about it, and I saw it on the replay. So yeah, they played a major part in American history, really, and a lot of them, were fighting in the Civil War.
So you visited Cornwall several times when you were young, and you associated it with some sort of magic, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah. There is something about Cornwall. Just little things. I mean, like if you go down the extreme far west, there is an area called Penwith. That's P-E-N, again, P-E-N, W-I-T-H. That's just like a district. And within that area, there are there's lots of granite. I mean, there's granite throughout Cornwall. Like as a backbone of Cornwall is like granite. And it's a very narrow peninsula. And so you've got the history, you've got the smuggling, you've got the fishing, and you've got the mining. But with the granite, that possibly plays a big part in all the art and culture down there. I mean, there's a place called St. Ives right down in the far west. It's a fantastic, most beautiful place. I mean, it looks like it belongs in the Med, especially on a beautiful day. It's better than the Med. Well, that's good. That's good. And it's a fantastic place. And that town, it's a very small town with a little harbour, a fishing town and an artist town. Well, the artists have been going there for 200-300 years. And just about every famous painter you could think of in the last sort of 150 years or so a lot of them spent some time in St. Ives. They lived there. And that applies to sort of poets and musicians too, like folk musicians. There was a little club in quite near St. Ives, a few miles away, where people like Ralph McTell, I can't think of their names when I'm put on the spot, but there's so many people who've been through that. That was back in the 60s. Oh, Donovan, of course. Donovan was quite late to it, but he was. I liked him. I liked Donovan. People accused him of copying Dylan, and I love Dylan too. But Donovan is far more sort of eclectic than Dylan. If you listen to Donovan, he's got a far wider range, and I like them both. But he plays like he was one of the first to sort of bring world music to Britain and so on. And also, he plays. He plays a bit of jazz. He plays a bit of everything, really.
So, were there particular experiences in general that you had that made you associate magic with Cornwall, or was it just sort of an overall vibe?
It's an overall vibe, but I have had experiences there. So the overall vibe is just it's difficult to explain. But when you cross over, there's a River Tamar that splits up Devon from Cornwall, where Devon is England, and very, very proud of it, and Cornwall is England technically, politically, but the flag changes once you get over that bridge, and there's a feeling once you start going through the hills, the granite hills, and so on. There is it's difficult to put it into words, but there's a mystical feeling. You sort of know it. You'll know it. I mean, quite a few times I've climbed up on these hills, and they're not small, and they can be really bleak. The best time to go up them is in the winter, with mist swirling around and so on. And I've had a few wonderful days, just either with mates or just on my own, just clambering around these massive, like absolutely huge lumps of granite, all piled on top of each other, and sort of surrounded by this rocky, sort of granite studded hills, and from the top of these hills at the far end of that peninsula, you can see both. Well, on a clear day, you can see the sea on both sides. So that's the Irish Sea and the English Channel. You can see them both. And I mean, like when I was very young. I mean, I think I put it in the book. I was about 16. Yeah, about 16 or 17. We went up there, and the weather wasn't too bad. But when we got up there, it changed a bit, and this mist came in. And these mists, they just come in from nowhere, really. Well, they come off the sea. And pretty soon you can find yourself just stuck. You don't really know where you are because you can't really see far enough to know where you are. But you also get like little pockets where it's totally clear. And then there's like a wall of this mist. And that is creepy. I don't know quite why it is, but it's creepy. And we saw this dog. This is like when I was 16 or 17, which just suddenly appeared, came running towards us, and it had these weird eyes. Well, we thought it did. It was sort of like reddish eyes. And it just sort of came up to us and sort of stayed there for a while, like it was checking us out. And then it just parted off again, went off through round the corner and through the mist and away. And we were expecting the owner to sort of suddenly come through the mist as well, but they didn't. It could have just been a stray dog. I'm not suggesting it, but it just had that weird feeling about it. But there's a lot of witchcraft around there. And this all ties into the literature and the art side of it. A lot of these people who are drawn, they're sort of drawn to the area. Like Donovan. Donovan wasn't from there. Donovan was from sort of north of London, but he was Scottish heritage, and he travelled down, and like I think in his book he says he just felt drawn there because that's where all the sort of, what do they call them, the Beat Generation or whatever, they were all being drawn. Yeah, the hippies and that sort of. In fact, I can remember when I was a kid, and I didn't understand what was going on, but I could see all this stuff. There used to be these buskers playing in St Ives, and they were the coolest people when you were a kid. Just like they're all sort of playing sort of Donovan and Dylan and so on. And there was a guy who our name for him was Jesus, And he sorry, there's a lot of movement going on in my house all of a sudden. Okay, it's Janice and the dog. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry about that, listeners.
I didn't know whether there was poltergeist activity going on.
Not this time. we do have some stuff going on here, but I'll tell you about that in a minute if you like. But where was I? Sorry, I've been distracted.
You were talking about the buskers, and there was a guy named that you called Jesus. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus, yeah. Yeah, so there was this guy, and he was, I mean, I was only 12, 13 when I saw this guy, so I'm 6'1" and a bit now, but back then anyone would have looked tall because I wasn't so tall, but he looked huge. He looked like 6'3", 6'4", and he was dressed, trying to remember how he's dressed, just sort of slightly hippie-ish for the time, it was like the tail end of all that. This was like, most of them had left, but there were still in sort of encampments, hippie encampments all around that area. But there were a few left, and he would just walk through the town, and it looked so odd because he was so different to everyone else. But it's just, but he had these sort of disciples around him. That's the point. What I call him Jesus. He had this really, really long hair and a long beard, I think, and he would just put his hand up and just sort of draw attention to himself, and his disciples whatever would sort of gather around him. He was pulling them in, and he was fascinating. I mean, and I think it was my father that, I don't know if everyone was calling him, but he called him Jesus. So hi, sorry, that's Janice just returned. So what was I talking about? Jesus, yeah. So there's all these characters. It pulls these characters in. So you get artists, you get people from literature, even Crowley. I mean, Crowley was there at some point, and I sort of know it's a bit of a non-story, really, but it is an interesting non-story because there's a difference of opinion. Some people think that the events didn't happen, and that he was never there. But I've dug into it and found that he clearly was there. So did you read that? I don't know if it was in the book, actually. I don't think I put it in the book.
It wasn't included there. I don't recall it.
No. Well, it's he's just typical of a sort of people, really, that the town attracted and the surroundings. And his thing goes back to 1938. I haven't sort of read about this lately, so it's all in my memory now. But he was involved sort of outside of St Ives. So St Ives is just a small town, and on the coast, beautiful little town. But it's surrounded by these little villages in the moorlands around. So if you imagine like what you see as Ireland, it's very similar to that, but a lot smaller. And he was just on the edge of a village called Zena. And so many people have lived in Zena. You'd be amazed at some of the people who've lived there. I mean, D.H. Lawrence, he was there. He was there earlier than Crowley. There were quite a few poets who just sort of would rent a cottage there and do their stuff. But Crowley was staying in a place called Newlyn, which is on the other coast. So it's only like 5 miles away, if that, And he was near Penzance, and he had these friends who were living in Zena on top of this hill in this, imagine a hill with no trees. It's very barren. There's just huge lumps of granite, and it's misty most of the time, And they were renting a cottage on top of this hill. So it was a couple. It's so difficult to explain all this story because it's a bit complicated, but they had a small cottage where if you go online now, you can find a lot of idiots, to be honest, who go to this cottage and they talk absolute rubbish about Crowley. They just really is absurd. They don't know the story at all. They've never done any research, but someone's told them that, and it's true, he was there, but they don't know what he was doing there. He didn't actually live there. He was visiting.
Crowley slept here.
Yeah, it's like that. But you see, you get these these jokers who just go in there and they video themselves, and they do this sort of swearing at whoever's, there's no one there, but there's, what do they call it, provoking and all this sort of stuff, and they draw pentagrams all over the walls and stuff. So it's very difficult to get to. It seems a lot of fuss to go to, having spent all that effort to get there.
Sure.
But anyway, this couple were renting it, and he was sort of friends with them, or he was influencing them, and they were carrying out some really strange experiments up there. And because it was out of the way, there was no one who could, he could do what he liked, really. And at some point, they were called Grahams, I think they were, from memory. I'd have to check that. The lady of this house, cottage, ran screaming from the cottage down to a larger property, which is called Eagle's Nest, where, again, a lot of artists have lived. But at the time, it was a retired Royal Navy, English Navy lieutenant, I think. I'd have to check that. And his wife, who were living in this much, much higher grade property, beautiful gardens and everything. And she came running. So it's the middle of the night. It's bleak. There's no roads. I mean, it's difficult to explain this. There is a sort of lane that goes through the village, but there's just lumps of granite everywhere. You can't get from A to B very quickly, especially in the dark. Mm-hmm. And it's dangerous. You could break your ankle or your leg, So this lady came screaming down the hill. It's quite a sort of 10-minute run or something. The lady of the bigger house heard all this and went out to see what was the problem. And this lady was a sort of gibbering wreck, so scared of something. Mm-hmm. She took her back up the hill. She wanted to see what was going on, and when she got there, there was some altercation with Aleister Crowley. That's the story is sort of like some people have some idea, different ideas about what went on, but the husband from a property up top of the hill was dead. Sorry, I got that wrong. The lady collapsed, I think, and she died, and the guy was supposedly put into a mental home because he'd gone crazy.
Wow.
But when people dig into this, there's not a lot to pin it down to fact. Mm-hmm. Sure. But as I say, I did do some digging on it about 2 or 3 years ago, and he was in Newlyn. That is a fact. And I was digging that out from a guy that did loads and loads of research before me, and I can't remember his name now, but he died a few years ago. Don't talk about Crowley, but it attracts lots of poets and musicians and writers.
Are there any sacred sites or stone circles?
Oh, everywhere, literally everywhere. Yeah. I mean, sort of circles, stone circles, and sorry, my throat's going. All around that area, it's burial cairns and all this sort of stuff. It's everywhere. In fact, there was one by that cottage I was just talking about. There was one just above it, which was probably why Crowley was so interested in that site, because he checked these places out,
Sure.
But suppose the story goes that he was kicked out of Cornwall by the local constabulary. But again, you can't really pin that down either. It's just sort of a lot of it's hearsay.
What was I going to say? Oh, fairy lore. Is there much fairy lore in Cornwall?
Yes, loads. I mean, again, that ties in with all the mines. I mean, you've got the knockers. Now, you've got... If you think about the knockers, I mean, you recently had some guests on who I know too, Joshua. Mm-hmm. He's Timothy. They've done a bit of research on this as well, and they sort of make the link with, in the past it was always sort of quite separate. You had knockers and you had pixies and so on, but they sort of made that link with poltergeists in houses, as in knocking, that sort of, if I'm not misquoting them. which is, I suppose, sort of straightforward, really. But the knockers were always in the mines. And in the old days, they used to say that they were, no, this isn't racist, this is just what they said. They said that they were the old Jews. Now, that brings in something else, because this is something I dig into all the time, and I'm hoping to write about. So there's a link, a big link, between Cornwall and Brittany, which is just on the other side of the channel in France, which is that other Celtic piece, a peninsula. Well, more than a peninsula over there. There's a link with the Holy Land, what would it, Israel and so on. And Jesus, and I'm not a religious person, but I would say 100% that Jesus was there. He was in Cornwall. And there's quite a lot of evidence in terms of culture and place names and all this sort of stuff, and foodstuffs. There's lots of links. But the one big one, which for me makes it 100%, are the crosses. The Cornish have a particular cross, a stone cross on their old churches, which you don't see anywhere else in the world. And the reason why you don't see it is because whereas elsewhere in the world you'll see the sort of 30-something Jesus on a cross. That's what you'll see in England. That's what you'll see, Italy or whatever. In Cornwall, it's the boy. It's the boy Jesus.
Interesting.
And the reason is they call them tunic crosses, Tunic. The reason is that he was there when he was a boy. And again, there is evidence for this. There's loads of it. In fact, there's loads of evidence that they were there. If somebody says there isn't, basically they haven't done much. They haven't done a lot of reading on it, because I've checked a lot of historical sources. People who know a lot more than I do about it, and I just love looking through their books and Roman historians and Gildas and people like that. They talk about this stuff, and it's just like a puzzle. You just have to sort of put it together. So
interesting.
Yeah, you see these little boys on stone crosses, and it's clearly a little boy with sort of long hair, and it's supposed to be Jesus. So he supposedly visited when he was about 6 years old the first time, and on the south coast of Cornwall is a place called Falmouth. It's like the biggest, I think it's the biggest natural harbour possibly in Europe, but definitely in England or Cornwall, And it's like this is the soft side of Cornwall. There's like two coasts. The south side is very soft. It's sort of pretty, lots of trees and beautiful rivers, and And on the north coast, it's rugged. It's still attractive, but it's not the same. You haven't got the trees and everything so much. But he landed at a place called Place. I'm not sure if that's why they called it Place, but that's what it's called. And there was supposedly a stone there, or like a big granite set, SETT, which he got out of the boat and trod on. And in later years, they put that aside, or they said this is where Jesus landed, And then supposedly that's been swapped for another one, and it's in safekeeping somewhere. But there's a link with Glastonbury as well. Have you heard of Glastonbury?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't ask you that. Of course you do.
I've never been there, but I
no.
know it.
Well, I hadn't been there until about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I lived in the country and I'd never been there. But the Jesus link was he came over with Joseph of Arimathea, who was a decurion so he was a very wealthy businessman, and he had interests in tin, buying and selling tin and other commodities, I suppose. So he knew that area really well. He was back and forward all the time. And the story goes that he brought Jesus with him, and Jesus liked it and they liked him. And there's always stories around Cornwall different places where they said, "Oh, this is where he came to," and it's like real folklore. It's been handed down through generations, and I knew people. I mean, unfortunately, well, the guy he did my foreword in the Cornish books, Michael Williams.
Yeah,
he was an amazing man, and what he didn't know about Cornwall wasn't worth knowing. You know, he knew so much about the history. Sorry, my mind's gone off. What was I saying? I need a drink. Sorry, I must go and grab some water. Ask me a question or something while I'm traveling.
Okay. Let's see. Well, obviously you're captured by Cornwall and the spirit of the place and the magic of the place. What was it that inspired you to set pen to paper and write these 2 books about Cornwall?
Right. Really, I'd heard so many fantastic stories from people, mostly other people's stories about things that had happened to them. Sorry, you're getting a horrible view of me as I'm moving around. I'm trying to take the lid off this bottle with one hand. Not easy. I don't know why I'm holding the phone, buddy. I'll give you something better to look at. Hang on, sorry.
You're doing great, Mark.
That's better. Right. So, yeah, I wanted to put them all together so that, and I had this sort of, I don't know whether I succeeded. I really don't. I mean, and only somebody who's read it would tell me if I did. And if you go by the reviews on Amazon, they're quite nice. They're very nice. Some of them are really, really nice reviews. So I'm hoping that people got what I was trying to do, which I didn't want to just do a collection of ghost stories, UFO stories and so on, which although it sort of is, but I've got like a thread that runs through it, which is like a passion for the place. And that I did a little chapter on the history and the sort of feel. I haven't looked at it for myself for a long time. Once I've done something, it's out there. It has a life of its own. I just let it go. Yeah, it's like when somebody writes a song. It's like it doesn't belong to them anymore.
For sure.
You know, they say so. And that's how I feel about my books. I have dipped into them occasionally and horrified myself when I've realised I've left an apostrophe out or something. I have to put it down again. So, but no, I wanted to have a thread running through it, which would sort of link it all together. And a lot of that comes from because I read so many people that, well, 1 or 2 in particular, who wrote about the mystical side of Cornwall. And his name's going to, I'm trying to think of his name. It's typical. I never remember when I think of it.
It'll come.
It'll come back to me in a minute.
Yeah.
Dennis Val Baker. That's the name I was trying to think of. Now, Dennis Val Baker was a prolific author. He wasn't Cornish. I think he was born in England, of Welsh parentage, I believe, or at least one of them was. But he moved to Cornwall, and that's where most of his life was spent. He was an adventurer. He was just the most fantastic. Not a superb. I wouldn't say he's a superb writer, but it was the quality of the stories and qualities of just his passion came through. Yeah. You know, I mean, he wasn't Steinbeck or whatever. But he just had this passion. So, and he would talk about all this. Well, he didn't do a lot of the spooky stuff, but he did some. But he would sort of just move his family to, and he didn't have a lot of money. He just lived by the seat of his pants, sort of thing. And he would just sort of rent some cottage in the middle of nowhere and then write stories about their adventures, you know. And he was able to bring out all the mystery and the folklore. I mean, he was, you know, sort of self-taught man. He knew so much about it. And I was sort of inspired by him, among others. John Betjeman and other people. There's so many people, so many great writers have links with Cornwall. Yeah, I mean, if you go right back, you've got Charles Dickens was down there at some point. So was Wilkie Collins. My mind's not great at remembering everything at this time of night, but all of these people a lot of these people have been there, and they've sort of drawn by this. The artists were drawn by the light because they've got a special sort of light there, which they think is to do with the fact that there's sea both sides of the peninsula, and supposedly the sun, when it hits the water, has some sort of effect. And I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but that's what they say. But there is a special light down there. It's if you ever get the chance to visit Cornwall, especially the far west, don't miss out.
I would love to.
It's really good.
Well, and were you sort of drawn to these subjects and fascinated by these things when you were young, and then you sort of had the experiences, or did the experiences sort of find you and that stirred your interest?
No, I've had experiences all my life, literally from when I was a toddler, which is what I'm doing now. I'm revising my first book, Wyatt's Weird World, which I put out in about 2015. And it was my first ever book. And when I picked it up and read it again, it was only on Kindle. I was horrified because I have improved a great deal. And plus, it wasn't just that. It was the fact that it was okay. It was readable. I mean, people said nice things about it, but I'd remembered so many other things that I kept saying, like I'd be speaking to people and we'd be trading experiences like you do, in the pub. So, I remember this happened. And I think, that's weird because something like that happened. And these memories would come back to you that you just don't really think about too much sometimes. You just throw away almost sometimes.
Sure.
And I was sort of making a list of all these things because I was trying to discipline myself to remember stuff rather than say, oh, yeah, I'll do that sometime. But then, of course, you forget. So I was jotting down just a few words to remind me of the experience and the event and when it happened. And then I would sort of do a bit of research, that's what I've been doing recently, finding out when it did actually happen by asking my sisters, where were we at such and such a time? Was this the time that this happened? And can you remember this? That just lots. Some of the things I've added are quite small. I mean, they're not scary. None of my experiences have ever been scary. I mean, maybe briefly, but not really scary. They just life just goes on around them. So I just wanted to write them all down. That was like an exercise. Originally, it was an exercise in sort of putting it all behind me, but also leaving it for my kids one day to, Dad was crazy, look what he says here, So, fun really, but it was true. But I didn't really expect to publish it. And then I think I was reading one of the chapters out, and somebody said, you ought to publish this because it's entertaining, it's, interesting, whatever. So I did. And as I say, I've got a lot more, 5 or 6 pieces that I didn't remember the first time round.
Cool.
So, and it's a lot better written as well, So
I can't wait to read the revised version of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I look forward to it.
So I was doing one yesterday, actually. It was about a similar place to Cornwall. It's the neighbour in Devon. They've also got granite, and they've also got high moors. It's not as magical. I mean, it isn't. I don't know why. It's got the same backbone, It's got the same granite. I mean, there are lots of ghost stories in Devon. There really are, but and UFO, lots of UFO stuff. But it doesn't have that magic. For me, it doesn't anyway. And for most people, it doesn't.
There are some places that are just a little thinner than others, like the veil between the two worlds.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's a few famous quotes on that as well. I think I wish I could remember them. I think Dennis Vale Baker said something similar to that. And did you ever see the Poldark films or series?
No.
There's a writer called Winston Graham. He set all. I mean, if you like, I mean, it was made for TV a couple of ways. Made in the 70s originally. I have a sort of vague connection with that series. And the second series has just recently come out in the last few years, and they're mega successful in Britain. And they sell it to Australia and New Zealand and various other places. But they're basically, the author's been gone a few years now, quite a few years, but he wrote about the history. He sort of tied in all the smuggling and the fishing and the mining and tied it into the business side of things. And he wrote, I don't know how many there was, probably 11, 12 or more novels based on the same family. Beautifully written, I mean, really well written. And people could never understand why I was reading them when I was younger, because the TV put it across as sort of like a romantic novel, which it was, but it had all this banking and, mining and stuff. I was learning about banking practices in the 17th century and stuff. It doesn't sound exciting, but it just taught you how things were put together, how mines were financed, and all this sort of stuff. So you're reading this stuff, but you're learning all the time. And it's about the sort of the old class system in England as it was then, and the mining disasters and the smuggling that was going on, and the fact that the upper classes were all involved in the smuggling. They all had a little piece of the action. So, when these things were going on, they would just look the other way, They would close their curtains. They couldn't see. They didn't see anything.
Kind of like now.
Yeah. So, yeah, they were fascinating books. And he wasn't Cornish, but he sort of got drawn down there and lived there for quite a long time. And a lot of people write their best work down there, so. Sorry, I've gone right off the topic. I can't remember what you started with.
Oh, that's okay. That's the perfect kind of conversation. Yeah. You don't know where you started the path, and you just kind of meander through.
Yeah, but you should give me like a destination, like I don't know, something weird, like I don't know, a pink leotard or something, and we'll just try and get there.
I love your essay on Twin Peaks.
Oh, thank you.
Really, really brilliant, and I love how you talk about the first scene of Twin Peaks and how stark that is, and you can almost feel like the atmosphere of the environment is another cast member.
Yes,
I really love how you were able to kind of draw that out. Can you talk about?
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, your
fascination with Twin Peaks.
It's strange actually. It was two things. Literally today. I'm sure he won't mind me saying so. Joshua, who you had on the show a few weeks ago, we've been. So I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm only guessing here, but there were. I don't know how many essayists are in the book. I've just put my notepad down because I was trying to remember. Yeah, we folk and no fair. I'm going to have to go and grab it. I had it written down because he's only literally recently given us the actual working titles, and I thought I can never. Excuse me, I can never quite remember it.
Is the book? Are you talking about the book that's a compilation of the Fae and film?
Yeah, that's it. I've just found it. So the actual title is called Fairy Films. Cool. We as in sort of like the Scots would say we, it's small. Fairy film, that's it. Fairy films, we folk on the big screen.
Cool.
And I think there was probably much debate about what to call it, but that sort of nails it really. So I'm not sure how many other writers were involved, but I'm guessing, and I might be wrong, sort of maybe 10. And each one of us had to choose a film, obviously a big screen. So I stupidly chose Twin Peaks because I loved it and I wanted to, and I just felt there was going to be a lot in it, but I didn't think at the time, but everyone else was choosing like a 90-minute film or maybe a 2-hour film.
Exactly.
And I chose, like, you know how long it is with a new series.
Yes.
And and when I chose it, I didn't really take into account the last series, whatever, the third one, which was 3-4 years ago now, probably.
Yeah.
So I had to, and I hadn't seen the final series. I had to watch that again. I had to watch it. I didn't enjoy that as much as the first ones, to be honest. I just didn't.
It's a different beast.
Oh yeah. And so anyway, I watched all of it again, and I just sat and took notes. And I watched it like I'd never watched it before because I knew I had to sort of dig something out of it.
Yeah.
So I didn't watch it with the same pleasure that I did the first time round, because when I first watched it, I'm trying to think when that was now. Memories. Oh dear, when was it? 80 something, wasn't it?
When it aired?
Yeah, I'm trying to
It was
remember.
91.
Yeah.
Oh, 90, yeah, right, yeah, 91, you're right, yeah. I can sort of remember, watching that first one. I've seen a trailer for it, thinking, oh, that looks good. And when I was younger watching that, what was I, 91, so I was 31. And for me at the time, what drew me was I liked the humour of it. Initially, I loved that quirkiness about it. I just love all that stuff. And I loved I have to admit, I loved most of the ladies on it, So, there's something for everyone there, wasn't there, really?
Sure.
But, and
there's some ho hunks in there, too.
Yeah, that's right. There's probably more hunks, as well, yeah. And I just loved it. I said it's a fantastic series, and just little bits of it stuck with me over the years. So much of that imagery just sticks with you. Like, for example, it's at the top of my head, you've got Cooper driving into Twin Peaks for the first time, and he's talking to Diane on his recorder, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember exactly what he says, but he's basically saying, so there's, what are these trees? What are these trees? And he's got that mindset that he wants to know. He wants to know everything.
Yeah.
And it's just, he was amazing. Well, they all were. The cast was fantastic.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't think there was only one role which I thought was, and it wasn't the actor's fault. I just think his name, was it Bobby? I'd have to check again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the two mates, they were sort of supposedly like the high school bullies sort of thing, weren't they?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it was his mate. He never really had much to do, did he?
Except be a prick.
Yeah. And isn't it strange how he ended up being the copper, didn't he? The son of the Air Force guy.
Yeah.
The colonel. Yeah.
I thought it was touching his role in the.
Oh yeah. I mean, there were. Sorry, after you.
No. Well, I was going to just say I love Cooper's role because he not only is very logical and reasonable and level-headed, but he's also very open to esoteric ideas. Like when he's throwing the stones.
Yeah, that's what came to mind when you said that. Yeah. He's got them all sat down and they're looking so puzzled. What the hell is he doing now?
Yeah, it's amazing. I love the combination of all of that. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, he's so. What was it? Your initial question you asked me was about the book, wasn't it? I think. Other people chose other series. I'm not sure what. I'm looking forward to read their stuff as well because I know one of them's done Labyrinth.
Mm.
So that'll be interesting. Yeah. But yeah, that's what I was going to tell you. I don't know whether it was on your show. You would be able to tell me. But Janice, my lady, said to me, you got to listen to this, And there was some guy talking about, it's very recently on a podcast, and he was talking about Twin Peaks. Oh, I know it was. Sorry, it was Jim Howard. It was on Jim Howard, on one of his, I'm not sure which one it was. He has several shows, doesn't he? Mm. And this guy was talking about Twin Peaks, and he said, oh, yeah, I've solved it all, and this is what this meant, and this is what that meant. And he just went off on one for about 10 minutes. And I mean, I'm not saying he's wrong. He's probably right. He's probably got a far better brain than I have. I don't, but he's what he found out of it is totally different to what, the thing. I mean, all the things he mentioned, he didn't mention any of the stuff that I dug out of there. I don't know. Maybe you just come at it from a different angle, maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not saying he's wrong. I just think, I think you get out of it what you want to get out of it to a certain extent. And I think saying that, Lynch meant this and Frost or whatever, they meant this when they did this. And I don't know. I think, to me, Lynch leaves things open. He's to let you, have your own space to.
Well, I think that he also leaves space open for him, too. I think there's so much spontaneity that happens while he directs anything, much less Twin Peaks, that I mean, Bob was just kind of something that he threw in on the fly. It wasn't a he wasn't a major character in the original series at all. Yeah. So a lot of it is just very flow of consciousness.
Yeah.
So when people try and dissect every little minute, it seems sort of silly because I'm not even sure he could explain what he's doing.
No, I think the intent is that it's like trying to interpret a dream.
Yeah.
So every person that perceives it is going to bring their template to that dream.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that makes him such a brilliant director and writer is that his intention is not to have something that's so concretized that you say, this is what it is.
Yes, that's right.
He's really giving you space to interpret it as though it were your dream.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It speaks in dream language. It doesn't speak in waking language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just love it. It's just fascinating. And as I say, I found the last series sort of slightly disturbing in places. Just trying to wrap my head around it all, but
sure. I think I feel the same way, but I appreciate that too. That uncomfortableness or those very long meditative pauses. That's exactly how I think the first 2 seasons would have been if he would have had total control over it, and he wouldn't have been on,
ABC.
Yes, ABC. That's what I was trying to
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So
funny
that's
because he talks about Cooper being his other half, like he's another version of him.
Yeah.
If he was an actor, or a character, it would be Cooper. So it kind of gives him the room to create this reality that he can't live in the normal default world, but he can explore through film language and through television. So I found that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And there's tons of recurring themes too, many of which you bring up in your essay. Synchronicities, the forest, how many things happen in the forest, what that is a metaphor for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really into that side of it. I mean, I was hoping to sort of hone in on that. Well, that was the intention of the essay, on the whole woods thing, because that ties in with other parts of my life, my which I explained, walking in woods when I was a kid, and also with the history of a country and so on. And I just love it whole, and a lot of the stories. It was really weird because a lot of the books that I was reading at the time that I was writing that essay, just weirdly sort of tied in with Twin Peaks. I mean, I'm trying to remember the names of the book. I mean, you've heard of Algernon Blackwood. I mean, even his name, Blackwood. I mean, it's just so strange. And I used to read a lot of his short stories when I was younger, and I've sort of come back to them now. And they're sort of really weird, sort of dark and sort of gothic and sort of very just creepy. Like people don't write like that now. So, and there were a few of his stories that tied sort of almost directly into Twin Peaks. And there was another, Arthur, I never know how to say his name, Arthur Machen, Welsh writer. And he had a little short story it was like a compendium of people who had influenced Tolkien. And I found that story in there, and I was just like, they're ideal size, you can sort of read them in like less than 20 minutes sometimes,
Oh, wow.
and they're just great little stories. And again, it tied in with that woodland aspect, the sort of folklore thing. So there's like a running thread through that, and that is, I think that's what I tend to do with all my stuff. I sort of personalize it. So if I was just going to tell you, like in my Weird World book, if I was just going to tell you the experience, it would be boring. So it's just like, well, this happened, and I've seen books like that. I've read them, and I never get very far. I just put them down. But so I sort of use all that literature I read in the past that I enjoyed so much. So people like the Dennis Vale Bakers and other names have elude me, and I sort of wrap it into my own. I sort of think, I didn't just read spooky stuff. I read lots of, as I say, like novels and stuff, and James Herriot of all people. I don't know, have you ever read James Herriot stuff?
No.
He writes about. He did. He's been gone a long time now, but he wrote stories. He was a veterinarian in the Yorkshire Dales in England, sort of just before the Second World War, and then through the war, and then for a decade or so afterwards, I think, or more. No, a lot more than that, actually, a lot more than that. So he was just telling the stories about his everyday life, working, with animals, livestock and so on. But he made it funny, he actually exaggerated stories. I mean, there's some fantastic stories that he came up with. I could tell you one of them. It's hilarious, actually. So you imagine, I'll just make it short. He was a country vet. Now, he didn't put this. I don't think he put this in the book, actually. I think this came from somebody else who knew him. So you have to imagine like this small market town in northern England. In amongst the northern dales, it's very rural, and this is like the 1950s, I think this was. And somebody brought him a long time since I read this. So I heard it. Somebody brought him in a cat, their domestic cat, which was suffering with some disease. Something's definitely wrong with it. And he didn't want to say to the people, the lady there and then, "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm probably going to have to put your cat down because it's got whatever it had." So he wanted just to have a bit of time to buy himself some time to think, well, he would do everything he could to save this cat. So he said to the lady, "I'll do the best I possibly can, and I'll let you know when it's done." So he then he waited until she's gone, and when he gets a minute, he gets the cat, and he remembered a lecture that he'd had at college, the veterinarian school in Glasgow in Scotland, where they told them that if you get I think it was a lamb, when a lamb is born and they're not breathing, you hold them by what you used to do, supposedly, hold them by the tail, and they spin them around the top of their head.
What?
Yeah, seriously.
Holy shit.
And evidently it gets air in the lungs, and it makes them sort of, gasp, but that's it, and it brings them to life. And supposedly it worked. So he remembered this. You know where I'm going with this. He remembered this.
Feel it.
Yeah. So he went out into the back garden of this veterinary, and it was a beautiful morning, and he got it by the tail and he spun it around his head. And at some point he must have gone a bit too much effort into it, and it slipped out of his hand and it went flying off. Because these were like narrow backyards, all with fences and stuff, and trees, like apple trees and so on. And it went flying off, and he thought, "Oh, damn, I've lost it. It's bound to have died because of the impact when it hit, would have hit the ground or whatever." And it was already ill, So he thought that what he would do is, so he sort of quietly went back in the surgery, and then at some point whether he rang her, I don't know, but he said to the lady, "Oh, I'm very sorry, but we lost your cat." And he told her a little white lie. He said, I think he said they tried to operate, and it was just couldn't. Now, meanwhile, he comes out of his front door, and I don't know what the sequence of events, but he comes out of his front door to go out on a call up in the Dales, looking after cows or whatever in the farms. Mm-hmm. And he sees a neighbour 2 or 3 doors down, and the neighbour says to him, "You never guess what happened to me yesterday." He said, "I was sunbathing in the garden, sat in a deck chair," and he said, all of a sudden, this cat fell out of a tree and hit me on the head. And of course, he instantly realised what it was, and he said, "Oh, that's strange. Was the cat okay?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "It just ran off." So that cat, which he said that he told the lady,
it expired.
Expired, and he dealt with it, would probably come back from the dead at some point to that lady.
Wow.
But evidently he didn't put. I think the BBC wouldn't, because the BBC serialised it, and I don't think they wanted to. They thought it was a bit of a cruel story, but I think it's a great story.
That's fantastic.
They don't want the liability of swinging cats.
No, that's right. Yeah, no cats were injured in this series or something.
Exactly.
So will you explain the Green Man lore for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah. Well, the Green Man sort of goes back. You can sort of trace it right back to sort of the Greeks and so on. And it's sort of worked its way through, Northern Europe, I suppose. The Germans had a similar one, didn't they? So it's sort of Saxons, I suppose, and they would have brought it into Britain. I mean, there's always been some sort of connection with sort of Green Man in. I can't really say much about it, really. That's about all I know, really. It sort of comes out of ancient Greece, doesn't it?
Mm.
Yeah, well, I believe so.
Is that the same as Jack of the Green?
It's all sort of connected, yeah. Actually, somebody who knows a lot more about that stuff would be, I don't know if you've ever had him on, Dr. Jack Hunter.
I know, but he's on my list.
He's
a couple of books down the line to read.
He actually is published by the same people who are publishing this book on fairy folklore.
Cool.
So he's got a book called Greening the Paranormal, which is published by the same people. So I haven't read it, but I've read clips of it, and it's really good because he just totally concentrates on that side of it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading his stuff.
And what's a pisky?
Yeah, pisky is very, very, very Cornish. I mean, you don't get them anywhere else. So they're like little creatures. They're like little people. So they're similar to, like, you have. We sort of digressed earlier, didn't we? So the knockers in Cornwall, you've got the knockers and the pisky. So the knockers are down the mines, and they are either good or bad. Good fairy, bad fairy. So you've got quite often the knocking was said to be like a warning from a ghost of. That's right, because we went off in the Holy Land thing, didn't we? So the ghost of the old Jews, which would have been, because there would have been Jews working in those mines, as in from what would it have been then, Palestine or whatever it was. So they would have come over. So there was a connection. Just going off on one a bit, there was a connection. If you go back to that Jesus thing, I'll come back to your pixies, but if you go back to that Jesus thing, I should have made a point that when Jesus supposedly, and I think he did, come to Cornwall, it wasn't anything new, because Joseph of Arimathea was already dealing in tin and so on, and people like him. But that trade had already been going on for maybe 500 or 1,000 years or whatever before his time. So that would account for the family connection, and that would account for, supposedly after after Jesus was crucified, his followers were all persecuted by the Romans, and they would obviously chased out of the country or whatever, And a lot of those people would have followed those traditional routes, which they knew through their families because they would have had family, literally family in Cornwall and England, in Glastonbury, which is a little bit further up, nearer to Bristol. They would have had family connections. So, and like Mary Magdalene, I think it's Mary Magdalene, she was supposedly from Brittany. So once you start digging into this ancient history with the Cornish and the Holy Land together, there's amazing links. So it sort of explains it. That's where they all went when they escaped. Who was it? Pontius Pilate. So when they escaped, the first ever church was, well, the first ever above ground church was supposedly built at Glastonbury. And there are writings, like ancient writings, that back that up. It's something like they say, like, on this holy earth, there's it's all sort of oldie worldy English and so on. I've seen that. I can't quote it from my memory, but yeah, they built it from wattle and daub, as it was called then. So that's that link, which I didn't really make clear earlier. So there was already a connection there. So it wasn't like some random place that they ran off to. Right. They had family there, family and friends that they knew they could trust. And Britain was considered, that's the other thing, Britain was always considered to be this wild, lawless place before the Romans got there, and the Romans cleaned it up and gave us law and order. And it's a bit like that scene from Life of Brian. That's exactly. Sort of, what have the Romans ever done for us? Well, but it turns out, if you as you know, there's like a narrative that comes through mainstream, which is you sort of follow a certain course. This is how things happened, But once you start digging into history books, you get so many great historians who don't follow that at all. They just follow wherever it takes them. And that's where I find most of the real history is probably coming from. It's like, there's a guy, I'm not sure if he's still around, there's a pair of them in England called Wilson and Blackett. And they are like independent amateur historians. And they have traced back all the Arthur stuff. The King Arthur. Now, we were told when we were kids that, it's just legend, it's just fairy stories, But we now know that it wasn't. And there was more than one Arthur, because there has to be, because of the lifespans shown in the regal sort of lifespans that they show and stuff. And he couldn't possibly have been, one man couldn't have lived for sort of 300 years or whatever it was. So, and I've digressed again, haven't I? So Pixies, Pixies. So the Pixies, similar sort of. There's another one. I'm trying to think of the other one. There's three of them. There's Piskies, Knockers, and what's the other one called? But they're actually prevalent around St Ives again, because there's these granite hills around there where they're supposed to have been. The legends say that these were up, and it's similar to Ireland again. It's a similar sort of folklore, and there's a lot of that comes through in the language and culture that's still, if somebody. Like, for example, my elderly auntie who died quite a long time ago now, she used to say to me, and she was like Cornish born and bred, like this tiny little old lady, beautiful and funny, and she used to say that her son, who played for a big tough, well, he's not that big, but he plays rugby for Cornwall. He's a tough guy. He used to, when he was younger, he used to get himself in all these scrapes after the rugby club and so on, and get chased by gangs of blokes trying to kill him or whatever. And he used to come home, and my auntie she used to think it was hilarious. She'd tell me all the stories, what he'd been up to. He's quite old now. He's about 70 now, but he's still got that mischievous spark about him. He just winds people up. So he used to get sort of get involved in these incidents and that. And when he come home, my auntie would say to me, he was Pisky led. And basically Pisky led to her, and she was like born and bred Cornish and like long line. It was more to do with sort of being naughty, being being a bit drunk and just playing the fool.
Mm-hmm.
That was what it was to her. But I've read books where they say it's something quite different to that. But that's real. That's what they use.
The more traditional use is that you kind of get distracted off of your path, right?
Yes, like so you might get abducted or yeah. I mean, there are sort of folklore stories that come out of, like, I don't know, 1700s or whatever. I think I put a few of them in the book, where people would go, and those stories, if you read them, they tie up with the David Paulides stuff.
Yeah.
It's the same thing going on. It's just more ancient language that describes it. I mean, like little boy in Truro, in a little village, I think it's Crispin or something outside Truro, and the lady had put him out to play in the garden, and he was picking flowers. And next time she looked out, he's gone, totally gone. And then there's a search party put out, and cut a long story short, he eventually turns up in the same place where they've been checking.
Yeah.
So, which comes back to what you said earlier about the veil. So maybe they're coming through from some other. Oh, I've got another story to tell you on that as well.
Please do.
Yeah. So, but basically, they're probably coming through. However it works, we don't know, do we? But they're coming through from some alternate dimension, and they're taking samples or whatever they're doing, which ties into something else which happened in Devon, the neighbouring place with the granite hills as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know how long ago this was now, 10, 15 years ago, my younger sister's ex-husband was a Devon lad. So he was so proud of Devon. He loved it. And I used to wind him up. I used to send him a Cornish calendar every Christmas because I just thought it was, and he used to get so annoyed.
That's great.
What do I want this for? We've got Devon. We've got the best beaches. We've got the best hills, and everything was about Devon.
That's funny.
So anyway, he offered to take me. He knew Dartmoor really, really well, and I don't know if you know much about Dartmoor, but it's this it's similar to Bodmin Moor, which is in Cornwall, similar to look at, but for some reason, Bodmin Moor is just a bit more magical. It's a bit prettier in some way. Like Jamaica Inn, you've heard of Jamaica Inn? Daphne du Maurier, the story. Yeah. Well, that's all based on Bodmin Moor. But Dartmoor is similar, and it's got similar places, and it's not that far away. And he said, because I used to sort of just say, what do I want to go up there for? It's just a boring hill with lumps of granite on it. I can do that in Cornwall. And he said, no, you got to come up. So he talked me into going for a walk with him and his friend. And this guy I'm talking about, he was a policeman in London. That's what he did. Very straightforward guy, very sort of materialist, really, I suppose. So he took me for this long, I think about 8 or 9 miles, something like that, on this horrible springy turf that they got on these. It's difficult to walk on, and you got this gorse and heather everywhere. And this other guy who was with him, an older gentleman, when we sat down to have a cup of tea, he said, tell Mark about your encounter, because he knew I was into all this stuff. So it turns out this guy was up there on his own, and I was watching him when he was telling me the story, and he definitely was recounting something that happened, you could just tell. But he said he saw these two little, he thought they were children, some distance ahead of him. Oh my, the battery's getting low. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
That's right. Yeah, it's 20% left, so I've got to be careful. So he watched what he thought were two children ahead of him, and he said they were in amongst these blackberry bushes. I don't think he knew they were blackberry bushes until he got closer, but that's where they were. He just saw them in there, and he said they had little shoulder bags, and they were taking, well, it turned out they were blackberries, he thinks, and putting them in these bags. And as he got closer, he realised they weren't children. They were little people, and they were wearing red, I think he said red boiler suits, or what looked like a boiler suit. And he said they hadn't noticed him until he got quite close, by which time there was a sort of mild panic. when these two little creatures just scurried off into the, what do you call it, gorse. Mm-hmm. Now, gorse only grows to about, I suppose, 3 to 4 foot. And it just coats the hills. You just get large patches of it. Mm-hmm. And he said they went into this gorse and he didn't see them come out again. Mm-hmm. So, and then, and I've tied, so that sort of ties into this sort of pisky thing as well, Mm-hmm. So there is something that lives on these, there's stuff that I think they're coming from elsewhere. I don't think they're there.
Yeah, sure.
And that ties in as well with, there's a fantastic book I recommend called Killers on the Moor, which is by a guy called, if you ever get a chance to talk to him, is Mike Freebury. Okay. And the guy that didn't write the book but did a research with him is a friend of mine called Dave Gillam. Dave Gillam runs the Cornwall UFO Research Group. Mm-hmm. He's a really great guy. He's absolutely, well, he had an experience himself in Truro in Cornwall, which I think it was, I put it in the book, mm-hmm. where he saw these helicopters following this weird light, which was literally sort of his garden. So he's down in that area I talked about earlier. It's got quite close to that. But he's in a town, quite a big, well, it's a city really. It's got a huge cathedral and so on. But it's still very rural by American standards, Mm-hmm. But when he stood in his back garden, he sort of overlooked this small, very small valley. And he said he saw, I'd have to read it again to see what he said, but there's some odd lights travelling around, which he knew, well, he thought it was a helicopter to start with, and he realised it wasn't. Mm-hmm. Or I think his wife realised it wasn't when she got a better view of it. He went up the road to another place so he could get a better view. And they definitely saw UFOs of some description that night, and they saw the helicopters. I think they were Army or Air Force, I can't remember now, but they were chasing them. And they were sort of obviously being left behind every time, they were just playing with them.
Yeah, of course.
And that's another theme that comes through. If you read the book, it's like every time the police or the Air Force get involved, or the government get involved, they just can't cope with it. They're, I suppose they're embarrassed by it, so they deny all knowledge of it and so on. But they always send 2 jets up. That is a running theme as well.
Interesting.
So one of the chapters talks about another friend of mine in the north part of Cornwall who he basically, I don't know if you read it, but he went out on like an outward bound sort of camping work strip, and basically the idea was to team build, to get them to meet each other and so on. And he basically wanted to go and walk up this high hill to get a better view of the coastline as the sun was going down. And as he did so, so he's next door, I should have mentioned that. He was next door, where he was camping was next door to the GCHQ. So I don't know what the official term is, but it's like a spy station. Mm-hmm. Mm. And they basically spy on every communication going around the world.
Yeah.
And it's run by your people, the NSA, mm-hmm. and the CIA. And at this point, they're going to cut in and listen to us because they've heard the buzzwords. So
they're not our people. We don't claim them.
So anyway, he said all of a sudden he was just taking pictures, and then the lights came on, which is normal. The lights of this huge base came on, mm-hmm. and he said it looked so pretty that he wanted to take some photos. So he just took, I think it was three shots, and it's like professional camera. Mm-hmm. I think it was some Canon or something, one of his old school Canons, and he just basically flick, and when he had this experience where he felt very, very cold, like something was chasing him, like a light came out of the woods nearby, and he felt the chill and everything, and he is quite a sensitive guy. you when you experience this stuff, you get after a while, because he's even older than me. You get to know it and you accept it as you're older. You sort of know it's coming, whereas in the past it might have just washed over you.
Sure.
You know, you'd experience it, but you wouldn't know it was coming, maybe. Mm-hmm. So he knew it was coming and so on. Then he saw the two jets go over. And when two jets go over you where he was, because he was on the coast, those two jets would have been off the other side of the peninsula within, like, I don't know, 20 seconds or something. It's a small place. I'm just guessing, but, you know, it's a small place. So he didn't put two and two together then. He just took pictures. So in the morning, he basically put them through his computer system just to see what he got with his pictures and all the other pictures he took. And I put that in the book. So you can clearly see there is something which he didn't see with his naked eye over the top of that station, which is quite ironic because it's a spy station and they're spying on the spies.
Yeah,
sure.
Exactly.
So, and I fiddled with the colours and everything to see what I could find, just the editing, just basic editing, and it does bring up a solid object. You can sort of see it. It looks like your typical disc.
Interesting.
And like you said, there was nothing there at all. You didn't see it. And then, of course, the two jets, they always send up. So they know they must have technology which tells them when there's stuff's around. And they'd already scrambled from nearby. And this happens again and again, you know. So where were we before I digressed onto UFOs? And oh yeah, so the guy next door, so my friend Derek saw this object, realised it wasn't there when he took it and couldn't see it, realised what it was. So his neighbour worked at that facility, and he knew, actually known him for years, and the guy would never tell him what he did at work, so he's not allowed to. So he went out in the garden and basically said to him, I've got some interesting photos. I was by your workplace last night, you know, and would you come and have a look? And he didn't. I don't think he led him, you know, like leading a witness. I don't think he did. But when he saw it, he wasn't surprised because he'd actually seen something much bigger with workmates over that base.
Wow.
But they're not allowed to talk about it. But
I was going to ask you,
yeah, we're not supposed to tell anyone, because he did tell him. So I obviously changed his name. And the other thing was, he said to Derek, he said he was really calm about it. He said, were there two jets, Derek? I just lost my earpiece. And he said, yeah. He said, how did you know that? And he said, they always send two jets up. Just like it's normal.
Interesting.
Yeah. Amazing.
So, yeah. And I did a lot of digging on the connections with that site and other places in Cornwall. And one thing that I was really amazed by was there was a list. I don't know how I found this list, but I saw it just on the net. And I found that the American government's property, like some security installations, properties, whatever, of the top 20 things, you know, buildings, whatever, facilities they have around the world, it was a huge percentage was in tiny Cornwall.
Wow.
Absolutely huge. And it wasn't just that place. They had other places. They got other places. And now think back to a few months ago when Biden went over to Britain. Where did they do it? They did it in that area. And they did it in the town where I actually lived. Literally, Carbis Bay. I lived there.
Interesting.
Wow.
So, but luckily I avoided all that because I was here. But they had
to download his new operating system, so they had to go there.
It's not much better than the old one.
No, it's like, I just feel embarrassed by it. It's
oh my God,
very sad, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't want to leave on that note.
No. Well, I mean, a lot of people, you know, I mean, we all laugh about it, but it's like my father had that, so I recognise it. I recognise it when I see it. It's like he shouldn't be put in that position, should he?
Not at all.
It's sad.
Well, maybe if you can just grace us with one more story, and it has to do with an essay that you sent me recently, which I think is going to be in your revised book.
About Uri.
Yeah, about your experience with Uri Geller and the effect that it had on you when you were a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you got out of the essay, but it was, it's like, it's one of those childhood experiences that I don't know. I mean, I know he's very controversial. And I know there's, well, let me explain. So for the listeners anyway, so I was about 12 and I was staying with some friends in a town sort of 50 miles away or so. And Uri Geller had just come over to Britain. It was the first time he'd come over. And because I was sort of fascinated by all that stuff, I was interested in that. My two mates who I knew there weren't so interested. They were more sort of sporty. But they were watching it with me, and I think possibly his mum was as well. I don't know, but so he went on this sort of Saturday morning show, and so I'm a bit distracted by this little fly thing that's whipping around, landing on me every 2 minutes. Sorry, it's probably one of those tiny little spy drones.
Exactly,
and I've just crushed it. There's somebody in an office somewhere going, damn, he's crushed it. Does he know how much that cost? Sorry. That's distracting me again. So we were watching it, and he did this experiment which he used to do a lot, which I didn't know about at the time, where he would, they would do it, somebody would do a drawing away from his gaze and hearing and so on, and then they would show the camera maybe, or show the host, and then they would seal it. And supposedly he never got a look at it. So he did one of these experiments, and then he stared at the camera, at the British public, whoever was watching, and he basically said, I'm going to transmit what I think whether he'd seen the picture, because you got to remember I was only 12 at the time. The only thing I remember is I got it right. That's all I remember.
Wow.
But the picture
just went out again.
It's just come on again to tell me. So basically, whether he was transmitting that picture himself or whether he'd read that from the sealed envelope, supposedly, and then he was transmitting it to us, I don't know. All I know is that he peered into the camera and he said, look, concentrate on my eyes. I'm going to send this message out. Now, I'm just a 12-year-old kid at the time, and I'm thinking, it sounds like fun. So I'm trying not to look as if I'm actually doing it, because I've got these two mates with me who are like football fans, and they're just like, don't be so daft, Look, he's doing it. But I was doing it, and I was staring at him and trying to concentrate. And this is a weird thing. I got a picture in my head, like just came from nowhere. I wasn't thinking about it, of a boat in a harbour. And it was quite a clear picture. It's very like a child's drawing. So it was like, like an inverted D, like an upside down D with a little mast and then two sails. And behind it was like a line which represented like a harbour wall. And I didn't say anything because, I would have just got laughed at. And I thought, I'm bound to be wrong. It's just a stupid thought I had, And then, however much later, they showed the drawing, and it floored me because it was what I saw in my head.
Wow.
Now, I don't know whether that is just some lucky guess, as I said at the end of the essay, or not. I don't know. But in the essay, I then look into the controversy over fellow magicians, stage magicians, say that he was cheating and he did it this way and he did it that way. But most of them, or if not all of them, could never repeat what he was doing. And then, and I was absolutely staggered because I didn't really look into that properly until recently to write this essay, because I wanted to know a bit more about the background to him and the controversy. So it turned out he was the CIA checked him out in 1973. and also Stanford research. So the DIA and the CIA, they supposedly checked him out.
Pardon me for interrupting you, but did you ever read Annie Jacobson's book that's called Phenomena? She does a lot of very in-depth research about Uri Geller and talks about how he has been used for decades by governments all over the world doing remote viewing.
Yes, he has said that there was some meeting with, just as an example, some meeting with the Russians where there was some peace deal going on, and they were a little bit reluctant to do certain things, and he claims that he scrambled their files in their briefcases. But just by staring at it and destroy, or whatever. And I think, although I'm sort of laughing about it, I think there's an element of truth in it. I think he has got these powers. Now, when you saw him, if you saw him do these, you can go on YouTube actually and see these videos of him at Stanford. And it's unbelievable. And they're taking him very seriously. And he's getting such a high success rate. Like they're putting all these, I think they're putting a metal ball bearing into his little aluminium cans. He's not allowed to touch them. Yep. He doesn't see it go in or anything. And there's lots of them. And he has to tell them which one to take out, all the ones that are empty, until it's down to the final two. And then he has to make a decision. And he aborted on some of those. I think out of 10, he got 8 correct.
Wow.
And the 2 that he missed, he got right, but he aborted because he wasn't sure. He wasn't 100% sure. They told him, if you're not sure, don't do it. So he's been very honest there. He could have just guessed. And he felt, no, I'm not sure, so I'm not going to say. And if he'd said so, he would have got 100%. Now, nobody would do that.
I really encourage you to read Annie Jacobson's book.
I will.
She covers at great length his work with the government. It's really fascinating. It's all documentation that's from the Freedom of Information Act, the Department of Justice, CIA, and this man is still so phenomenal in his ability that you can't deny what he is capable of.
I think there's jealousy, isn't there, amongst these stage magicians? Sure. I think they can't. I think what I put over in my essay is that they can't get over this because they're of a materialist mindset. There's always an answer.
Exactly.
They just can't get past that, and I think that's like, I mean, obviously you haven't read that yet, but I've sort of tied that in with the whole. That's like a micro version of the bigger problem we have, which is, when people look at paranormal stuff, I've got friends like it. They just can't go there because they just can't. I mean, and they're intelligent people, but when it comes to anything that they can't sort of touch and smell or whatever, it doesn't exist. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I usually say to them, "Oh, do you love your mother?" And they go, "Well, of course I do." So, well, prove it to me.
Weigh the love.
Weigh it. Yeah, measure it. Tell me exactly how much it is.
Exactly.
Well, the government wouldn't spend so much time, manpower, and energy studying someone without having something behind that.
For sure. Exactly.
And he's gone on missions where they've done mining, circling back to mining.
That's right. He's made a lot of money at that as well, hasn't he? Yeah.
A tremendous amount of money. I think he actually lives in Israel now.
Yeah, he does. He lived funnily enough, he lived in Reading, which is where my mum's from, in Berkshire, and which was where I was. He wasn't there. He was. I suppose he must have been in London, I suppose, but I wasn't that far away from London. Reading is probably, I don't know, half an hour, maybe not even that. So yeah, he was involved with a lot of football teams in England. He loves football, and he was at Exeter City, which is in Devon near Dartmoor, and very near Dartmoor, just on the edge of it. And he was at Reading. Again, we've just talked about Reading. And and recently, I didn't know this until I started digging into it for my essay to get a bit of a background. And there's a story that the England soccer team were playing. I'm saying soccer because there's probably a lot of Americans listening, but it's football to me. It'll always be football. But anyway, there was a penalty being taken, and it was, I can't remember how that would affect who and what. But the guy was ready to take the penalty, and it's basically the ball's just put down on the penalty spot, and it's so many yards from the goal. Mm-hmm. Only the goalie's allowed to be anywhere. The goalie's on the line. He has to stop it hitting the net, basically, or crossing the line. And no one can stop him. It's just a free kick, but a penalty. So he's just about to take it. And Uri Geller is supposedly in a helicopter, and he's spotted that this game's going on. And he knows the importance of it because he's getting the updates and so on. Mm-hmm. And he sees that they've got a penalty. He knows from the colour of the shirt who's got the penalty, And he says, I've got to do something about this. I've got to do something. So he claims, now I think this is where the showman comes in. He claims that he made that ball wobble just before the bloke took the kick. Now, when you slow it down, that ball did wobble. It moved off the spot, and yeah, it could have happened. It could have happened, but occasionally these things do happen. But there was no wind or anything. It was on it, and it just rolled.
Interesting.
Like no one near it.
Wow.
So, but you see, when he says things like that, one of the managers, he said, "Oh, every time," he said, we work hard to win a game or something. He said, he pops up and takes credit for it again. So it's I think he's a showman, but he's also incredibly gifted. And like you say, I think he probably maybe plays it down a bit so he can get on with that stuff you're talking about.
Absolutely
undercover sort of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I asked him to be on the Melt, but he's just not doing that kind of stuff anymore, which is disappointing. I would have loved to have talked to him, but at least he responded back. I was happy to hear from him.
Yeah.
And he didn't even use email. He just sent Chris a mental message.
He came to me in a dream, which was weird because I was in my underwear. I don't know what that was about. On that note, Mark, we want to be mindful of your time, and I'm afraid I want to shut the show down before the phone goes dead on you.
Yeah, it might do at some point. Yeah.
But we definitely need to continue this conversation. I would like to get, especially after you send me the copy of the revised book, I would love to get into more of your own personal experiences.
Okay. Yeah, I'd enjoy that. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. It was brilliant to talk to you.
Thank you.
So much for your time.
It's mutual. I was very nervous before I come on, but
why?
Yeah.
No need.
Well, most of the people you interview tend to be sort of well, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them tend to be very, very sort of I don't know how to put it. They're just there's a lot more sort of. I think I'm more down to earth than a lot of them. Put it like that.
I understand what you're saying. But I try to keep it all down to earth, no matter who it is. So you fit right in. You're part of the family. So.
Yeah, some of your shows I've listened to in recent weeks, months really. I've been doing a lot of work on the house here. Mm-hmm. My picture's just frozen. I'm not staying still. As still as that actually, but.
A good shot.
You're a ventriloquist.
Yeah, I think so.
Your glamour shot.
I'm trying to think of the names, but a couple of your interviews, all of them really, but I've really loved some of them. The guys that talk about, I can't think of his name. Is it the Danish guy? Is it Danish?
Ole.
Ole, yeah, I liked his stuff.
Yeah, McGar.
And you were talking about all this lockdown stuff. I know it was that. Was it Naomi Wolf? Was it Naomi Wolf?
I wish it was Naomi Wolf, but no, she's not been on.
Christiane Northrup, Dr. Northrup.
Yes, I listened to her.
She's a great one.
I wish I could remember who it was, but there's been a couple I've really, really enjoyed.
Oh, cool. Pamela Popper, maybe, or
I know of her. Yeah, no, I know those ones, but I'm a little bit out of touch with it because I've not, that political situation with all the lockdown stuff because I'm sort of away from my country. But I'm trying to keep on top of it, but things are not looking good in England.
For sure.
They're talking about locking down again in October. I'm sick of it. It's really annoyed me.
Yeah. And Australia is even worse.
Oh, yes, like a prison camp, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dreadful.
Awful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we could talk for hours on that alone, but I'm glad we haven't actually, because it means we've had a bit more fun.
Exactly.
That just depresses me, all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe we can touch on it next time, but we don't have to get bogged down there.
No.
Okay.
It's been really excellent talking to you. Thank you very much, and I hope someone out there enjoys the conversation.
I'm sure they will, inevitably. And when you get your own phone, make sure and text me your phone number, okay?
I will.
Okay, and we'll set something up soon.
Thank you very much.
Keep the browser open.
I will.
Well,
I've just remembered that.
His is uploading fine, so you don't have to keep the browser open. So,
you sure?
Anyway, no, you're at 100%. I'm the one that needs to keep my browser open. So
okay.
Anyway, Mark, thank you so much.
Mark.
Thank you. The battery's just about to go, because you're doing the ventriloquist act too now.
we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you.
Take care.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Bye.
If you've liked what you've heard and would like to contribute to The Melt, there are a few ways that you can do that. The most tangible would be financially. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find ways that you can contribute for as little as $3 a month. This will give you access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. Contributing financially will also help make The Melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast a full-time endeavor that I can fully devote my time to and provide you with more content. Another way of contributing would be to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating, and this will help it to reach more people. You can also spread the word to friends and family via social media, email, or word of mouth. And lastly, if none of those options are readily available or appealing to you, simply send your positive thoughts and intentions. In an interconnected and quantumly entangled multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.